Russia wasn't just supposed to win this war, it was supposed to be inevitable. More troops, more firepower, more everything. And even now, Moscow still sells the same story, that Ukraine will eventually break. But that's a myth, and Ukraine is dismantling it. As Russia's ruthless war with Ukraine rages through its fifth year, with no clear end still in sight, Kremlin officials cling desperately to the idea that their victory is right around the corner. They think that if they keep believing in that idea and keep pushing that narrative, it will eventually come to pass. Putin has pledged to keep fighting, no matter the cost, with the Russian leader remaining steadfast in his commitment to capture the Donbass region and achieve the initial objectives he set for the so-called special military operation so many moons ago. In the earlier stages of the war, those kinds of claims didn't sound at all unrealistic, because Russia had almost all of the advantages. It had the bigger army, it had a stronger economy, it had the power, the munitions, the supplies. And while war is unpredictable, when there's such a huge disparity between one side and the other, it's always going to be difficult for the smaller force to withstand the onslaught of its opponent. As time went by, it seemed logical and almost guaranteed that Ukraine's defenses would be worn down, that Russia would gain the ground it needed bit by bit. And that seemed to be exactly what was happening. Yes, Ukraine proved a much tougher nut to crack than anyone, especially Russia, had ever anticipated, but it was being worn down. Even when it found ways to dig in or even strike back against its enemy with drones and missiles, it still lost land. Russia still made gains, albeit at a snail's pace. And even when the Kremlin started to lose tens of thousands of troops every single month, it somehow found ways to recruit just as many, if not even more, to replace them. For a time, the war felt unwinnable for Ukraine. Its forces were doing an extraordinary job in prolonging the conflict, hitting where Russia hurt the most, and holding down the most important locations, delaying the capture of key towns and cities like Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Western sanctions were taking their toll too. Russia was being isolated, weakened, its economy was starting to crumble, and its losses rising by the day. Yet, still its war machine rumbled on. Still its forces found ways to gain little slivers and pockets of land here and there. It wasn't much, but it all added up. And while Russia could seemingly rely on a near infinite supply of able-bodied men to replenish its ranks, even dragging convicts out of their jail cells and shipping them to the front lines, Ukraine's numbers weren't quite as strong. And so, an inevitable Russian victory continued to appear the most likely eventual outcome. But in 2025, something started to change, and that shift continued into 2026. And now, all of a sudden, a Russian win seems less and less likely. In fact, the very opposite. A humiliating Kremlin defeat is actually becoming a more realistic proposition. Here's why, broken down into 4 key reasons. First, let's talk about territory. This has long been arguably the most effective way to measure how the war is going for both sides, and which one, if either, is in the ascendancy. In the early stages, Russia made massive gains. Its forces swept through Ukrainian territory, taking over quite large parts of the country, and even closing in on the capital of Kyiv before Ukraine started to fight back and force the enemy out. Since then, there's been a lot of back and forth in key regions, but Russia has, by and large, continued to claim additional pieces of territory with every passing month. In 2025, however, its advances, which were already remarkably slow, became veritably glacial. It made no major breakthroughs and captured very few key towns or cities, with gains coming at a steep cost. Ukraine held its ground incredibly well, using strategies like the bait and bleed, which involves luring Russian assault squads into specific locations before raining fire onto them with drones and artillery, to limit territorial losses while also keeping its own casualties to a minimum too. Thanks to this, over the course of the entire year of 2025, Russia gained less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. In the early months of 2026, its gains got even worse. Data from the Institute for the Study of War, one of the most reliable research organizations tracking the war since it began, shows that Russia was gaining over 200 square miles of ground each month at several points throughout the beginning of 2026. In February 2026, however, it captured a mere 50 square miles of ground. Not only that, but the very same month, for the first time in years, Ukraine actually managed to recapture more land than it lost. If Ukraine can repeat that feat more times moving forward, it won't just be prolonging this war in a stalemate situation, it'll be actively pushing Russian troops out of its land, sending Putin's war machine all the way back to square one, undoing years of effort, and cancelling out hundreds of thousands of the Kremlin's casualties in the process. Even if Ukraine can't always pull off those kinds of gains, the fact of the matter remains that Russian troops are barely moving forward at the moment. They're quite literally stuck in the mud, moving slower than almost any major force in any conflict in the last 100 years, even dating all the way back to World War I. For context, Ukraine still controls around 2,500 square miles of territory in the Donbass. So let's say that Russia continues to gain around 50 square miles of that each month. It would take several more years of grinding, attritional, expensive warfare just to at last assert control over that particular region. And there will still be countless more miles of Ukraine left over. Now, the second big reason why a Russian victory is becoming more evitable than inevitable is to do with people. Russia has lost a lot of people over the course of this war. While estimates vary, many sources agree that there have been well over 1 million Russian casualties at this stage, thanks in no small part to the country's almost suicidal tactics of throwing countless men into the meat grinder of the front lines without adequate training, equipment, or even any armor to protect them. While its rate of territorial gain has slowed, its casualty rate has dramatically increased as the war has gone on, to the point where it was regularly losing tens of thousands of troops every single month throughout 2025 and into 2026 as well. Most militaries on Earth would find it utterly impossible to cope with those levels of loss. But for a long time, Russia miraculously managed to do so. This is, after all, the largest country on the planet, home to over 140 million people. So even when tens of thousands of them were killed or wounded in Ukraine, Russia was consistently able to seek out more. Even when it had to resort to desperate measures like offering huge cash incentives, mobilizing convicts, sending critically ill patients to frontline locations, or strong-arming ethnic minorities into signing up for service, it was always able to replenish its ranks. But that's no longer the case. Data shows that in the early months of 2026, the pendulum has started to swing in the opposite direction. Moscow's monthly losses are now higher than the number of soldiers it can recruit. It's the first time that this has happened since 2022, and the numbers themselves tell the story. In the first quarter of 2026, the Russian army lost a staggering 89,000 troops, according to official data shared by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It was only able to recruit 80,000. That's a net loss of 9,000 soldiers. And it's only going to get worse from here, with Ukraine setting ambitious targets of 50,000 Russian casualties every month by the end of 2026. While the Kremlin may love to hide behind propaganda and pretend to the Russian public that everything is fine, it can't deny reality. It can't escape the facts and figures staring it right in the face. And if reports are to be believed, Moscow is already in a state of panic, with high-ranking officials fearfully scrambling for some sort of solution to this growing problem. In January 2026, for example, the Kremlin announced a new recruitment campaign aimed at bringing new drone pilots into its army, but this has allegedly fallen well short of expectations. Reports from the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense and other trusted organizations also suggest that Russia is having to rely more on paid mercenaries from Africa, Central Asia, and even North Korea just to top up its troop numbers. But before we go deeper into that, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We break it down like this every week. Now, in the face of this recruitment dilemma, Putin is stuck between a rock and a hard place, with no obvious answers and no easy ways out. On the one hand, he can persist with his current tactic, hoping that somehow Ukraine won't be able to keep up with its intensity and that casualty numbers may start to calm, at least a little. In the meantime, he can continue relying on mercenaries and other desperate measures to compensate for his army's losses. But that's a big risk, as there are no signs of Ukraine slowing down or easing off anytime soon. In fact, it looks more likely that Russia's casualty numbers will start to spiral even more dramatically in the weeks and months to come. And if the country can't keep its troop numbers up, it's going to find it incredibly hard to maintain any sort of intensity along the front lines. That means its territorial gains will become even slower, and its forces may even be forced backwards in key regions as Ukraine rallies and takes advantage of its enemy's weakened state. On the other hand, Putin could take the ultimate gamble of attempting some sort of mobilization, quite literally forcing hundreds of thousands of fighting-age men to sign up and be sent to the front lines. This would give the Russian army an enormous boost. But polls show that the Russian public, large parts of which are already growing increasingly frustrated with the ongoing war, would strongly disapprove of this type of action. Thus, Putin is left with an unsolvable problem. And that's not the only one. Which leads us on to the third major factor behind the increasing implausibility of an eventual Russian victory. the fact that Ukraine has managed to bring the war home to Russia like never before. When the conflict began, it was hard for many to imagine Ukraine even being able to defend itself against such strong opposition, let alone summoning the strength to strike back at Russia on its own soil. But as time went by, Ukraine started to shock the world, not just digging in and holding its ground, but beginning to carry out attacks beyond its borders, in Russia's border regions and beyond. It started off slow and small, the odd act of sabotage here, a drone strike there. But then those attacks became more frequent. All of a sudden, Russia's regions felt unsafe. Places like airfields, military production plants, command bases, and oil refineries were at the mercy of Ukraine. Drones, bombs, and missiles rained down on them. Explosions rang out, blazing fires began to spread, targets were damaged and assets destroyed, first millions, then billions of dollars worth of hardware and infrastructure all up in smoke. And the more time passed, the worse it got for Russia. In 2025, Ukraine really began to concentrate on the enemy's oil infrastructure, realizing that if it could cripple Putin's oil economy, it could potentially bring about an end to the war by forcing the Russian president to take a seat at the negotiation table. While Putin hasn't shown any willingness to thrash out a realistic peace deal with Zelensky so far, he is feeling the impact of all those drone and missile strikes. Recent reports show that up to 40% of Russia's oil export capacity has been disrupted, particularly in the wake of massive drone strikes on key refineries and Baltic seaports. Pipelines and fuel storage tanks have also been struck time and time again, with countless gallons of oil all going up in flames. The oil industry is the backbone of the Russian economy. When that bone fractures, the entire country suffers. And that's exactly what's happened here. With less oil being produced and shipped out to its few remaining trade partners, Russia is well and truly feeling the heat. Its economy may not be about to entirely collapse, but sits on the brink of a serious crisis. Its national wealth fund has dramatically diminished since pre-war times, and the war is soaking up a bigger and bigger percentage of the federal budget each year. This is not sustainable, especially if Ukraine's attacks continue or become even more damaging. Which brings us neatly onto the fourth point, the contrasting state of both armies in 2026. On the one hand, there's Russia, a country that was understandably feared far and wide around the world when the war began, with a military that experts agreed was easily the second strongest on the planet behind the United States. In 2022, whether they liked it or not, people respected the Russian military. It had a formidable reputation, formed through years of conflict, combined with powerful propaganda and effective marketing. Russia was believed by many to possess some of the most powerful tanks, the mightiest armored vehicles, the finest fighter jets, and the strongest air defenses on Earth. That's partly why it was such a widely held belief in the early stages of 2022 that Russia would quite easily crush Ukraine and win the war in a matter of weeks. Ukraine, meanwhile, was a military minnow on the world stage. It didn't have world-beating tanks, state-of-the-art air defenses, or any superior technologies to speak of. But as the war has progressed, both countries' militaries have moved in opposite directions, with Russia's reputation crumbling over time and Ukraine's being forged in steel and fire as the years went by. First, Russia's so-called world-leading tanks and armored vehicles fell at the first hurdle, failing to deliver the major territorial gains the Kremlin had expected. Its aerial forces were unable to achieve aerial superiority, and its legendary Black Sea Fleet was forced to run and hide after Ukraine started attacking it with drones and missiles. Its army, in spite of its size, struggled to achieve any of its stated objectives, and many of its allegedly best weapons, like the T-14 Armata, saw only limited and cautious deployment, reportedly being withdrawn after brief use amid concerns over performance. In the meantime, despite starting off with a far weaker military than its opponent, Ukraine achieved the impossible. Again and again, it defied the odds, holding contested territories, retaking lost land, catching its enemy off guard, and building one of the best domestic defense industries in Europe. It mastered drone warfare, surpassing its enemy's tactics and using its newfound advantage to carry out hundreds of effective strikes on enemy positions and infrastructure. And it developed missiles that have since become the envy of much of the world, like the Neptune and the long-range Flamingo, which was fast-tracked into service and has already been used to strike targets in 2026. Now, we've reached a state that would seem like a fantasy in 2022, a state where the Ukrainian military actually appears to be more than a match for the Russian war machine, and where confidence in Russian strength has plummeted to all-time lows, both domestically and internationally. Several of the countries that historically relied on Russia to supply them with armor, weapons, and munitions have started backing out of deals and looking for other options. And even within Russia itself, while many may not admit openly, large parts of the public are increasingly concerned that this is a war their country cannot win and one that shouldn't be allowed to continue any longer. Indeed, a recent poll showed that 67% of Russians, a record high, felt it was time for peace negotiations and an end to the conflict. Another poll, shared by the state-owned media agency TASS, also found that 75% of Russians trust Putin today. While that may seem high, it's actually the lowest level since the war started, and it's highly likely that these figures are exaggerated given TASS's reputation for publishing pro-Kremlin propaganda. Added together, these factors put Russia in the worst position it's been in for decades. Its army is barely advancing, its casualties are skyrocketing, its recruitment is failing, its reputation is fractured, its economy is on fire, and its people no longer have any faith that this is all somehow going to work out. None of that means that the war is about to end, because Putin is a remarkably stubborn man and will continue with his conquest no matter the cost. He appears ready to run his entire country into the ground in a desperate, failing attempt to save face. But while he refuses to face facts, the rest of the world is slowly waking up to reality. This war isn't, in fact, only going to end one way. It isn't leading slowly but surely towards an inevitable Russian victory and a complete Ukrainian collapse. On the contrary, it now appears to be heading in the exact opposite direction, with the once mighty Russia looking weaker than ever and plucky underdog Ukraine exceeding expectations like never before. Now, you can learn more about how Ukraine truly has turned the tide of battle in this video, which looks at how Kyiv's defenders dished out several disasters for Putin in March 2026. Or for a look at how Ukrainian innovation trumps Russian muscle, watch this video, which examines how cheap and simple drones have been used to take out multi-million-dollar battle tanks. And for more breaking news, insightful analysis, and in-depth reporting you won't want to miss, subscribe to The Military Show today.